Hey everyone, before we dive into this absolute chaos, I need your help. We're pushing hard to hit 1,000 subscribers and build this community. If you enjoy breakdowns like this, real talk with no filter, hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription gets us closer to that goal and keeps this content coming. Now let's get into it. The Cleveland Browns just got absolutely demolished, and I'm not talking about what happened on the field. I'm talking about what happened after the game. Joe Flacco, the man they discarded like yesterday's trash, just delivered the most calculated, devastating press conference in recent memory. He smiled, he praised his new team, and in the process, he systematically dismantled everything Kevin Stefanski stands for as a coach. This wasn't just shade, this was a precision strike. What makes this so incredible is that Flacco didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to get angry. He simply told everyone how great his new coach is, and in doing so, he exposed exactly what was wrong in Cleveland. When a Super Bowl MVP needs to publicly thank his coach for being patient and allowing him to play football, that tells you everything about what he was dealing with before. That's not normal praise. That's a message. The game itself set the stage perfectly. 11 days. That's all Joe Flacco had with the Cincinnati Bengals before he stepped onto the field against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 11 days to learn a playbook, build chemistry with receivers, and understand a system. The Steelers' defense, coached by Mike Tomlin, isn't some pushover unit. They make quarterbacks look foolish on a weekly basis. They've been doing it for years. Yet here comes Flacco, barely 2 weeks removed from signing his contract, and he looks like he's been running this offense for years. Over 200 yards passing, 0 interceptions, multiple clutch drives. He was reading defenses pre-snap like he was solving a puzzle he'd seen 1,000 times. The composure was unreal. The accuracy was there. The decision-making was sharp. Everything that was supposedly gone, everything that Cleveland told us was finished, it all showed up in Cincinnati, and it showed up immediately. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when a quarterback is put in a position to succeed, rather than being suffocated by overthinking and complexity. Meanwhile, back in Cleveland, the offense under Kevin Stefanski continues to struggle scoring points. Week after week, we watch this supposedly genius offensive mind fail to put together consistent drives. The defense plays lights out, keeps them in games, and the offense repays them by going 3 and out. It's maddening to watch, and it raises the obvious question. If Joe Flacco can look this good in 11 days with Cincinnati, what exactly was the problem in Cleveland? That brings us to the press conference, the moment that will be replayed in Cleveland for years. A reporter asks Flacco about his new coach, Zac Taylor, and how he helped him get ready so quickly. Standard question. Expected answer would be something generic about working hard and having good preparation. But Flacco didn't give a standard answer. He gave us a masterclass in saying everything without saying anything directly. He starts talking about patience. He specifically mentions that Zac Taylor has been patient with him. Even when Flacco wasn't getting the calls exactly right, even when he was still learning, Taylor didn't get bothered by it. He worked with him. He stayed calm. He allowed him to just go play football. Now, think about that phrasing for a second. Allowed him to just go play football. Why would a veteran quarterback with 15 years in the league and a Super Bowl ring need to be grateful that his coach allowed him to play football? You only say that if your previous experience was the opposite. You only emphasize patience if you dealt with impatience. You only praise someone for not getting bothered if someone else was constantly bothered. Flacco just told everyone watching that Kevin Stefanski is an impatient coach who gets frustrated with his players. He told us that Stefanski wouldn't let him just play the game. He told us that the environment in Cleveland was restrictive and micromanaged to the point where a Super Bowl MVP couldn't operate freely. This is massive. This confirms what everyone watching Browns games has suspected. The offense isn't struggling because of talent. It's struggling because the coach won't get out of his own way. Stefanski is so committed to his system, so obsessed with his complex schemes, that he can't adjust to his players. He forces them into his vision rather than building his vision around them. That works in theory. That sounds smart in a meeting room, but on the field, with real human beings trying to execute, it falls apart. Joe Flacco has seen everything in this league. He's played for multiple teams, worked with different coaching staffs, won at the highest level. When a player with that resume tells you that being allowed to play football is something special, something worth mentioning, that's a red flag the size of Texas. It means his previous coach was breathing down his neck, overcorrecting every decision, making him second guess his instincts. You can't play quarterback like that. You can't perform when you're constantly looking over your shoulder waiting for your coach to get bothered. But Flacco wasn't finished. He kept going, he continued praising Zac Taylor, and this is where it gets even more pointed. He talks about how coaches who have done it, coaches with experience, they want to put all kinds of good stuff into the playbook. They want to show everything they know, and Flacco says that Taylor has fought that urge. He's been disciplined about keeping things manageable. He's prioritized execution over complexity. Think about what that means. Flacco is describing a coach who is smart enough to know that less is often more. A coach who understands that having 500 plays in your playbook means nothing if your players can't execute them efficiently. Taylor, according to Flacco, resisted the temptation to overcomplicate things. He kept it simple. He focused on what his players could do well, rather than forcing them to do everything. Now, who does that sound like the opposite of? Who in the NFL is famous for having an offense that looks brilliant on paper but terrible on the field? Who runs a system that requires everything to be perfect or else it collapses completely? Kevin Stefanski. That's who. The man loves his playbook. He loves his scheme. He loves showing everyone how smart he is with motion and misdirection and complex route combinations. But at the end of the day, the scoreboard doesn't care about how smart your plays are. It cares about points. Flacco is telling us that Stefanski can't fight that urge. He can't resist putting all kinds of good stuff in there even when it's counterproductive. He's so in love with his own intelligence that he buries his players under the weight of his genius. And when they can't execute his perfect vision, he gets bothered, he gets frustrated, he blames them for not understanding what should be obvious to anyone with a brain, except it's not obvious, because it's unnecessarily complicated. This is an indictment. This is a veteran quarterback explaining to the world why he failed in Cleveland and why he's succeeding in Cincinnati, without ever directly criticizing his former coach. It's brilliant, it's calculated, and it's devastating, because everyone knows exactly who he's talking about. Everyone understands the subtext. The message is crystal clear, even though it's wrapped in compliments for Zac Taylor. What makes this even better is the context of how Flacco ended up in Cincinnati in the first place. This wasn't a free agent signing. This wasn't Joe choosing to leave Cleveland for a better opportunity. The Browns traded him. They actively sent him away, and not just anywhere. They sent him to a division rival. They sent him to a team they play twice a year. They basically gifted the Cincinnati Bengals a capable veteran quarterback who knows their system and their personnel. Andrew Berry, the general manager, made this trade. He looked at Joe Flacco and decided that getting a 5th round draft pick was more valuable than keeping him away from their rivals. A 5th round pick, not a 2nd rounder, not even a 3rd, a 5th, the kind of pick that has maybe a 10% chance of ever contributing to your roster. That was the price Cleveland put on making sure Joe Flacco could come back and haunt them. The arrogance is staggering. The lack of foresight is embarrassing. Every single person who knows football saw this coming except for the people making decisions in Cleveland. Mike Tomlin was reportedly furious when he heard about the trade. Furious, because he knew exactly what it meant. He knew Flacco wasn't washed. He knew Flacco could still play. And he knew that the Steelers would have to face him twice a year now instead of never. But Berry and Stefanski thought they knew better. They thought they were the smartest guys in the room. They thought they could evaluate talent better than everyone else. They looked at a Super Bowl MVP and decided he had nothing left to offer. And now, less than a month later, that same quarterback is lighting up their division and exposing their incompetence for the entire world to see. The Cleveland media is having an absolute meltdown over this. Tony Rizzo, one of the most prominent voices in Cleveland sports, went scorched earth after the game. He's calling for heads to roll. He's saying this is a fireable offense. And he's not wrong. When you trade a functional quarterback to a division rival for peanuts and then watch him immediately succeed, that's organizational malpractice. That's not just a bad decision, that's negligence. Rizzo pointed out something that really matters. He said the fans deserve better. The city deserves better. Cleveland has suffered through decades of terrible football. They've watched ownership make mistake after mistake. They've seen coaches come and go. They've endured embarrassment after embarrassment. And just when it seemed like maybe things things were turning around, just when they finally had a defense good enough to compete, the offense falls apart because the coach is too stubborn to adapt. The frustration is real, the anger is justified, because this wasn't some unpredictable collapse, this was preventable. Joe Flacco showed last season that he could still play. He came in off the street and won games for Cleveland. He gave them life when their season was dying, and rather than keeping him around as a valuable backup, or at minimum keeping him away from their enemies, they shipped him out for nothing. What's even worse is the perception that ownership cares more about building a new stadium than putting together a winning team. Jimmy Haslam has been focused on getting a dome built, pushing for public funding, making plans for a facility that won't open for years. Meanwhile, the product on the field is unwatchable. The priorities seem completely backwards. Fans don't care about fancy stadiums if the team is losing. They'd rather watch a winner in a decrepit building than watch a loser in a palace. And that brings us back to Kevin Stefanski and the massive hot seat he's sitting on. He won Coach of the Year twice. He's supposed to be an offensive genius. He's supposed to be the guy who maximizes talent and creates opportunities. But what we're seeing is the opposite. We're seeing an inflexible coach who can't adjust when his perfect plan doesn't work. We're seeing someone who treats veteran players like they're rookies who need constant correction. We're seeing an offense that consistently underperforms despite having weapons. The defense is elite. Myles Garrett is one of the best players in football. Denzel Ward is a lockdown corner. The unit as a whole is fast, physical, and well coached. They give the offense short fields. They create turnovers. They keep games close. And week after week, the offense rewards them with 3 and outs. It's demoralizing. It's exhausting. And eventually, even the best defenses break when they're on the field for 40 minutes a game. Players are frustrated. You can see it in their body language. You can hear it in their carefully worded comments to the media. They're not going to come out and directly blast their coach, but the subtext is there. When defensive players talk about needing to be perfect, when they mention that they can't afford mistakes, what they're really saying is that they don't trust the offense to score enough points. They're saying they have to carry the team because the other side of the ball isn't holding up their end. That falls on coaching. That falls on Stefanski. He calls the plays. He designs the system. He sets the tone. And if veteran players can't execute what he's asking them to do, that's not a player problem. That's a coaching problem. Good coaches meet their players where they are. They figure out what their guys do well and they lean into it. They simplify when necessary. They adjust their approach based on personnel. Stefanski doesn't seem capable of that. He has his way and everyone else has to figure it out. Joe Flacco figured it out in 11 days with a different team. That's the most damning part of this entire situation. It proves that Flacco still has it. It proves that when given a reasonable system and a coach who trusts him, he can perform at a high level. It proves that Cleveland's failure with him wasn't about his arm or his brain or his ability. It was about the environment. It was about the coaching. It was about Kevin Stefanski. The comparison is brutal and it's unavoidable. Cincinnati didn't do anything magical. They didn't reinvent football. They brought in a veteran quarterback, gave him a simplified version of their system, trusted him to make plays, and stayed patient while he learned. That's it. That's the entire formula. And it worked immediately because Joe Flacco is still a good quarterback when you don't sabotage him with overthinking and micromanagement. Zach Taylor isn't some legendary coach. He's had his share of struggles in Cincinnati, but he understands something fundamental that Stefanski apparently doesn't. You can't force players into boxes they don't fit. You can't make a veteran quarterback play like a rookie. You can't treat professionals like they need their hand held through every decision. At some point, you have to trust that the players you have are good enough to execute a reasonable game plan. That trust was clearly missing in Cleveland. Flacco's comments about being allowed to play football, about his coach not getting bothered, those aren't throwaway lines. Those are specific pointed observations about what he was dealing with before. And when you combine that with his immediate success in Cincinnati, the picture becomes crystal clear. The Browns organization failed Joe Flacco. They created an environment where he couldn't succeed, and then they blamed him for their failure and shipped him out. Now they're paying the price. Now everyone can see what actually happened. Joe Flacco isn't washed. Kevin Stefanski is the problem. Andrew Berry is the problem. The entire structure in Cleveland is rotten from the top down. And the worst part is that they did this to themselves. Nobody forced them to trade Flacco to Cincinnati. Nobody made them give up on him after he showed he could still play. They made that choice. They were arrogant enough to believe they knew something everyone else didn't. The conspiracy theory floating around Cleveland is actually kind of interesting. Some people are wondering if this is intentional, if maybe the organization is tanking on purpose, if maybe they don't actually care about winning this season because they have other priorities. Building that stadium, positioning for the future, whatever it might be. And if you wanted to tank without making it obvious, shipping out your competent backup quarterback would be a smart move. It guarantees that if your starter gets hurt, you're stuck with someone who can't win games. But if that's the strategy, and there's no proof it is, they made a critical error. They sent Flacco somewhere he could embarrass them. They gave him motivation and opportunity at the same time. They handed him the perfect revenge scenario, and he's taking full advantage of it. He's not just winning games, he's making them look like fools. He's proving that their evaluation was completely wrong. He's exposing their coaching as inadequate. That's what makes his press conference so devastating. It's not angry, it's not bitter, it's calm and measured and complimentary toward his new team, which somehow makes it more brutal because he's not attacking Cleveland directly. He's just honestly describing what it's like to play for a good coach. And in doing so, he's implicitly describing what it was like to play for a bad one. The contrast speaks for itself. Cleveland fans are tired. They're exhausted from decades of this cycle. New regime comes in. Everyone gets excited. Things look promising for a minute, then it falls apart. Rinse and repeat. The Browns have one of the most loyal fan bases in sports. They stick with this team through everything. They deserve better than watching their front office hand wins to division rivals. They deserve better than watching a Coach of the Year winner fail to score touchdowns. The media is calling for accountability. They want answers from Andrew Berry. They want to know how this trade happened. They want to know what the thought process was. They want to know if anyone in the organization takes responsibility for catastrophically bad decisions. But Berry has been silent. He's not holding press conferences. He's not answering tough questions. He's hiding behind the organizational wall while his decision blows up in spectacular fashion. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. When you make a bold move and it backfires, you own it. You stand up and explain your reasoning. You don't disappear and hope people forget. The longer Berry stays silent, the worse it looks. The more it seems like he knows he messed up and doesn't want to admit it. The more it seems like accountability doesn't exist in Cleveland's front office. And if they fire Stefanski, which seems increasingly likely, they have to fire Berry too. You can't fire the coach and keep the general manager who gave him a bad roster. You can't fire the chef and keep the guy buying rotten ingredients. They're tied together. Their fates are linked. If one goes, both have to go. Clean house. Start over. Bring in people who understand basic football concepts like don't help your division rivals. The players caught in the middle deserve sympathy. Myles Garrett is wasting his prime on a dysfunctional team. He's one of the most dominant defensive players in the league, and he might never play in a playoff game that matters because the offense can't hold up their end. Denzel Ward signed a massive contract to stay in Cleveland, and now he's watching his team spiral. These guys committed to the organization, and the organization is failing them. That's what makes this so frustrating to watch. There's talent on this roster. There are pieces that could win if properly utilized, but coaching and management are holding them back. They're making it harder than it needs to be. They're overthinking and overcomplicating and ultimately under-delivering, and now a quarterback they threw away is exposing all of it. Joe Flacco's revenge tour is just getting started. He's going to face Cleveland later this season. That game is going to be must-watch television. The storylines will be incredible. The motivation will be obvious. And if Flacco goes into Cleveland and beats them on their home field, the stadium might actually burn down from the rage. Fans will lose their minds. The media will go nuclear. It will be the final proof that this regime has to go. But even if that doesn't happen, the damage is already done. Flacco already won. He already proved his point. He showed everyone that he can still play. He showed everyone that Cleveland's evaluation was wrong. And most importantly, he showed everyone what kind of coach Kevin Stefanski really is. Not through attacks or insults, but through simple, honest praise of a coach who did things differently. That's the brilliance of what Flacco did. He didn't need to be mean. He didn't need to air dirty laundry. He just told the truth about his current situation and let everyone draw the obvious conclusions about his previous one. It's the most effective kind of criticism because it's impossible to refute. Stefanski can't come back and say Flacco is lying or exaggerating. All Flacco did was thank his new coach for being patient and trusting him. How do you argue with that? You can't. You just have to sit there and take it while everyone connects the dots. while everyone realizes what he's really saying, while your seat gets hotter and hotter until it's molten lava. That's where Stefanski is right now, in an impossible position, facing questions he can't answer, dealing with an offense that won't perform, watching his former quarterback succeed immediately after leaving. It's a nightmare scenario, and it's entirely self-inflicted. The Browns had a good thing going with Flacco as a backup. They had insurance. They had a veteran who could step in if needed. They had someone who knew the offense and could manage games. And they threw it away for nothing, for a draft pick that will probably never play a meaningful snap, because they were too smart for their own good, because they couldn't admit that sometimes the simple answer is the right answer. Now they're stuck. Their starter is dealing with injuries. Their backup situation is shaky. Their offense is broken. Their coach is on the hot seat. Their GM is in hiding, and the guy they got rid of is thriving elsewhere while subtly destroying their reputation. It's a complete disaster. It's organizational incompetence on a scale that's hard to comprehend, and it's all playing out in public for everyone to see. The national media is picking up on this story. It's not just Cleveland anymore. Everyone is talking about what a disaster this trade was. Everyone is laughing at the Browns for helping a division rival. Everyone is questioning why this franchise can never get out of its own way. The jokes write themselves at this point. Cleveland being Cleveland. Same old Browns. It never changes, except it should change. It has to change, because this level of dysfunction isn't sustainable. You can't keep making these mistakes and expect different results. At some point, ownership has to step in and clean house. At some point, they have to demand accountability. At some point, they have to put together a competent front office that makes smart decisions instead of arrogant ones. Joe Flacco forced that conversation to happen. He accelerated the timeline. He made it impossible to ignore the problems. And he did it all by simply playing good football and saying nice things about his coach. That's poetic justice. That's karma. That's a veteran quarterback getting the last laugh after being disrespected and discarded. His comments will be played on a loop in Cleveland. Every time the Browns offense struggles, someone will mention how Flacco is doing just fine in Cincinnati. Every time Stefanski's play calling looks too complicated, someone will remember Flacco praising Zach Taylor for keeping things simple. Every time a player looks frustrated, someone will wonder if they're dealing with the same impatience and micromanaging that Flacco dealt with. This story isn't going away. It's going to follow this regime until they're gone. It's become the defining narrative of their failure. They had something good and they threw it away because they thought they were smarter than everyone else. And now everyone knows they weren't. Everyone knows they made a massive mistake. Everyone knows they failed at basic general manager and coaching responsibilities. The saddest part is that this was avoidable. If they just kept Flacco as a backup, none of this happens. He's sitting on the bench in Cleveland as insurance. He's not making them look bad. He's not exposing their coaching. He's just there, ready if needed. That's all they had to do. Keep him or cut him. Those were the two reasonable options. Trading him to Cincinnati was the one thing they absolutely should not have done. But they did it anyway. They made the worst possible choice. And now they're suffering the consequences while Joe Flacco enjoys his redemption arc in orange and black. He's getting to play meaningful football again. He's getting to show he's not finished. He's getting to prove all the doubters wrong. And he's getting to do it while making his former organization look completely incompetent. That's a win for him in every possible way. That's how you handle disrespect, not with anger or bitterness, but with performance and subtle, devastating honesty. Show them they were wrong. Prove your value. And when someone asks you about it, tell the truth in a way that makes them look even worse. That's exactly what Joe Flacco did. That's why this press conference will be remembered for a long time. Cleveland fans are watching all of this happen in real time. They're seeing their fears confirmed. They're watching another regime fail. They're wondering when it will end. When will their team finally get it right? When will they stop being the punchline? When will they make smart decisions instead of repeatedly shooting themselves in the foot? Those are legitimate questions without good answers right now, because the people in charge don't seem capable of learning from their mistakes. They keep making the same errors over and over. They keep thinking they're smarter than basic football logic. They keep failing upward until eventually the failures become too big to ignore. We're at that point now. The failures are impossible to ignore. Joe Flacco made sure of that. He forced everyone to pay attention. He created a situation where Cleveland has to answer for their decisions, where Stefanski has to explain why his offense is broken, where Barry has to justify that trade, where ownership has to decide if this is acceptable. The answer should be obvious. This isn't acceptable. This isn't what a professional organization looks like. This isn't how you build a winner. You need competent leadership. You need coaches who can adapt adapt. You need a front office that makes smart decisions. Cleveland has none of those things right now, and until they get them, they're going to keep being the Browns. They're going to keep being a punchline. They're going to keep wasting talent and disappointing fans. Joe Flacco's revenge is complete. He won on the field, he won in the press conference, he won the narrative, and Cleveland lost everything. They lost a capable quarterback, they lost credibility, they lost the respect of their own media and fans. They lost any benefit of the doubt they might have had, all because they couldn't get out of their own way. That's the legacy of this moment. That's what people will remember, not the specific stats from the game, not the exact quotes from the press conference, but the overall story of a team that was too arrogant to see what was obvious to everyone else. That let a good player go for nothing and immediately got burned for it. That created an environment so toxic that a Super Bowl MVP had to specifically thank his new coach for basic decency. It's embarrassing, it's infuriating if you're a Browns fan, and it's entirely deserved. This is what happens when ego overtakes competence, when arrogance replaces humility, when organizations think they're smarter than they actually are. Reality comes crashing down, players speak truth to power, and everyone realizes the emperor has no clothes.